Hi, I'm Noam Maital, and welcome to the GovAI podcast. AI is the most powerful technology of our time, and government is still figuring out how to navigate this new frontier. Join me as we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming public service, unlocking potential efficiencies, the risks that no one's talking about, and what happens when innovation moves faster than regulation. I'm thrilled and honored to be joined by my good friend, Sophia Moore, Chief Innovation and Technology Officer at COTA. Sophia has been leading the charge in modernization public transit through cutting-edge technology, data-driven decision-making, and AI adoption, ensuring COTA stays ahead in the future of mobility, and brings a really unique perspective, having worked for many years, also in transportation and NetJet, so kind of the mix, bringing the private sector expertise into the public sector. I've known her for many years, one of the more innovative public sector leaders that I've known. So, Sophia, welcome to the GovAI podcast.
Hi, Noam. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here and talk about my role and then what we're doing at COTA and in the Central Ohio area.
So before we jump in, I have lots of questions for you around kind of AI within COTA and in general perspectives on the industry. But tell us a bit about COTA, Central Ohio Transit Authority, a little bit about your work and maybe how technology is infused in everything that you're doing there in your role at COTA.
Great. I love talking about Central Ohio and what we're doing here at COTA. So for those of you who don't know, COTA is in Columbus, Ohio. It is the 14th largest city in the United States, and it's growing rapidly. So with that, one of the things that's come about is that we really need to think about public transit and how can we make transit available to everybody and accessible that will help with the growth of the Central Ohio area. And one of those aspects was technology, is that we really need to embrace technology and understand how technology and transportation are going to be grouped together and how it really helps us drive the future of transportation. So that's where my role came in. I started here as Chief Innovation Officer 5 years ago to really look at what transit is doing and what we can do with technology to help with our growing Central Ohio area. And that quickly expanded to look at the technology and how we can embrace both of those areas and really use them to make Central Ohio forward thinking and have transportation for everyone.
And I'd add to that, you've kind of helped COTA adapt to some of the technological changes as they've happened. So my first question to you, I'm curious about, I've known you for many years, and as there's been shifts in technology, you've had to bring them into COTA. One of the most recent ones has been around generative AI and that emerging into our private life, right? We use it for ChatGPT. I use it sometimes to make stories for my kids even. So it's entering everywhere in the same way that we think about the way internet proliferated. How are you thinking about this at large for COTA in terms of maybe we'll take it in a zoomed in view of today, like how is this impacting the near term, short term, and then maybe a zoomed out view of grand scheme of COTA and where it can go with this technology, or maybe some of the challenges as well.
Sure. That's a great question, not just for COTA, but I think anyone in the public sector. I think a lot of us in the public sector are feeling challenged by it in terms of how do we integrate it, because it's very different than what public sector might usually be thinking about. And I think because technology now, a lot of public sector places, especially those in transportation, are really now driven by technology. And obviously, AI is one of those technologies that we can look into. One of the things I didn't mention when I did my introduction earlier is that the Central Ohio area just recently passed a levy for COTA to add an additional public transit to the Central Ohio area. So with that, the public is trusting us with their dollars to figure out how we can expand public transit. And I really see AI as one of those examples of the public trust that we're using public dollars to make this agency as efficient as we can be, to be forward thinking, to use data the way that we might be able to use it so we can really provide a great customer service and great transportation to the area. Now, I said a lot. There's a lot that goes into that. But I think it's really something that we're going to be asked to do more with less. Even though we have all of this funding that's coming into us, a lot of that funding is capital dollars and infrastructure dollars. And if we're going to have to expand our reach and expand the amount of service that we're looking for, then we need to find ways that technology can help support that, and have people be able to do a lot more. And that's how I see AI, that we can use it to strategically plan, and figure out how we can really understand our service even deeper. We can provide better customer service, how we can understand what's happening with our vehicles so we can be more responsive. And I think to me, that's a lot of times people talk about efficiencies, and of course, that's something that AI does. But I think it also allows for responsiveness, right? Understanding what's on the roads, understanding what might be happening there, and really being able to react and respond, so we can continue to provide that service. And I think that's the expectation that the public is expecting, is that we provide the best service that we can, in the Central Ohio area.
So I want to unpack that a bit more. A lot of times, the conversation when you talked about AI would immediately go to autonomous.
Yeah.
And I think we all can kind of, I'm not going to put it aside, but agree that it's a much, much broader conversation than that
Mhm.
at this point. It's almost kind of the edge case, but then the way we talk about generative AI is much more at an infrastructure level. What are some of the specific areas that you're excited to see changes in or bring into the fold within COTA?
Yeah, I think you're totally spot on with that, is that people think about AIs in terms of autonomous. And that's not something that we're looking into right now. It is a lot more about, looking at large data sets and bringing in a lot of disparate pieces of data. And how can we better understand what the customer needs and where the customer is going on a larger scale? And understanding movements of individuals. And so we can understand where our service would be best utilized, and where are people riding to, where are they going to jobs, where are they using transit. And I think that's a huge area, that bringing all of those different disparate public pieces of information into one area is a huge place where we can use AI. But I think there's also a lot of places where we can use it internally. Central Ohio area is expected to grow to 3.15 million. So I see that as 3.15 million potential customers. That's a huge data set. So how can we make sure that as we're processing that pieces of information, as we're looking at how we make sure that we're more efficient here, those are the places where I see that we can use AI. And I really think it's an opportunity cost for us, is that if we don't look at it, right, then we won't be responsive and we won't be able to provide the best service. And I want us to be able to utilize it and provide even better service than we have before.
Yeah, and there's a lot to piece out there. I mean, even just on the customer service side, if it used to be that you were limited by your representative and humans on the other side, when you think about agents now that are able to
Mhm.
tackle some of at least the basic requests, you can expand and extend your team to serve a much larger community with the same resources. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. But one of the other interesting phenomena is I remember I was an early user of some of these AI tools. And I remember I think maybe it's ChatGPT, 2.0, you would ask it a question, a prompt. And when it came to any question, this is before it had the search functionality on the internet. When you asked it anything about public agencies or government, it would just say and refer to you, we don't have records and we don't have this data. And the reason is because OpenAI, while they trained on everything, including YouTube, they did not have data from the government because they didn't want to get into legal issues. But the reason I'm saying all this, because one of the interesting facets of that is that there's still a lot of data that isn't built into these foundational models, that is public agencies' data or internal data. And I know that near and dear to your heart has been some challenges around building kind of data aggregation and the data cleansing process, which is going to be critical, right? When you start thinking about getting good answers, quality answers from internal data that you have. So maybe walk us through your journey on building out your data architecture And then how do you see that maybe some of those growing pains serving you actually in the near future as you're thinking about how AI can be leveraged on your existing data?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think one of the things that has definitely been a challenge for public agencies in general is they were not rooted in technology, right? They saw themselves primarily as the service that they provide, and they still are. But what's been a missing factor of that is how technology is helping provide that service. So, what's been missing, and what I think public agencies are tackling is, yes, I want to use AI, but I think we all know that AI is only as good as the data that you provide it. And when all of those different pieces of information are located in different places, they may not have good data governance, right? You don't want to use the data in the wrong way in terms of maybe missing pieces of data or data that's skewed in one way or the other. And I think that is a challenge for public agencies is that we're not biased by certain things, that we're not leaving certain things out. But then how do we jump forward and make sure the data is in a place that we can process? So one of the things that we've been talking about here is data governance. I know that this is something that APTA, which is the American Public Transit Association, is also talking about. Is that data governance is a really important aspect of this if we are to move forward in not just AI, but any type of technology, is that we have to understand how our data is used, who's the stewards of that data, how do we keep it fresh, how do we build in those processes as well. And I think that's a change for a lot of organizations. But it's really been a change here about that we are stewards of that data. We have to keep that data clean. So we're introducing new things that may not have existed in the organization before, so we can start to use those things. So those are some of the challenges and things that we're trying to tackle. The other thing, though, that is on our side is that the state of Ohio is doing a lot of things around data as well. So one of the things that the state of Ohio is doing is really trying to put everyone on Snowflake so we can start to use data from other public agencies, right? So if we're all on the same platform, now suddenly we have all sorts of other data sets that are available that we can share, but then that they can share with us too. So you can quickly think about the power that's going to be out there in a few years as all of our public agencies might be using the same type of platform. And then suddenly now you have multiple, many, many types of data sources that we could use. And I think that's where AI could be really powerful, is it's like we're going to be able to provide insights into things that we've never been able to before or would have taken maybe months and years to do so. So I'm really excited about that kind of stuff, of being able to have access to things that just seemed unfeasible or would be considered a very large project that just couldn't be tackled.
So, speaking of large project, I want to stay on the topic of data before I want to ask you a bit on the risk and governance that you're talking about. But since I know that the arduous path that you guys went on, the kind of data architecture cleansing, going back to that, and maybe for some of our listeners, kind of not just the success that took you to get there, but what were your biggest lessons learned, or maybe even if you're brave enough to share some failures along the way that you think are kind of pitfalls that others should be aware of.
Sure. I think the hardest part is bringing everyone else along. It's really easy to say, like, hey, this is how we should do it, and everyone should just agree with me, and let's just go in that direction. But to really bring along the organization, and I feel like it's a cultural change. That means education, that means training, that means providing support structures for those organizations, because everyone else has their job that they have other priorities. This is a cultural change, and that we're all in it together. We're all here to support the bigger mission. And if everyone can kind of hone in and gain around and like center around that this is not about people not doing a good job. This is about us being better. And this is about being able to provide a better service. But this is a cultural change that we are all part of. I think people can get around it, but it takes time. And I think that's the hard part, is because you have access to all these different things. You want to take advantage of it. You want to do it now. But those cultural things take a lot of time. And I think sometimes organizations fail at this because they don't plan for it. And so that part of the planning about bringing people along in that cultural change needs to be part of it too. And I won't say that we've solved it, to just, to be open about it. I think we're on the journey. We haven't completed that journey. We're on that journey, but we know that the people side of it is an aspect that sometimes is the harder part.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about AI and technology, but in the backbone of this is people using it in the end. And so, I was going to jump to governance, but you kind of raised the topic around education. And let's face it, right? In the public sector, the workforce, generally speaking, is less technological than in the private sector enterprise market, right? So when you think about a new tool coming about, has a ton of potential, whether it's you're using tools like Copilot or more specific vertical oriented tools, there's a big knowledge gap that exists right now. Um, how do you think COTA, or in general, kind of the government and public agencies, to go about upskilling a workforce? There's two sides to this question. One is the educational piece of upskilling. The second one is a bit more of that nuanced change management, where someone's been doing their job the way they've been doing it for 10, 15 years. And now you come and say, let's completely shift that. Foundational models can do that in 5 seconds, and you're going to spend your time on something
Yeah,
else.
yeah,
I'm curious how you think of those two kind of challenges,
yeah.
opportunities, challenges, whatever you want to call them.
Well, it's an interesting comment, because what's been different about AI that I found really interesting than other technologies that have come in is that AI came up and then we all decided we wanted to use it. And usually, what we've always told people with technology projects is, well, let's figure out what the problem is first and then the right technology. This has been the opposite, is like, well, everybody wants Copilot. But then I've been reading some stuff about, like, people rolled Copilot out in their organization, public or private, and then 3 to 6 months later, only 30% of the employees are using it. And it's because they rolled it out. They didn't think about the culture. They didn't think about what problems that they want them to solve, and they didn't provide the training. So it's like it's a tool that everyone feels like they should be using, but then we haven't told them necessarily the problems that they can. And I think some people have said, oh, it can help with email and stuff like that. And those are all great. But the thing is, it can help with so much more than that. And I think that's where organizations are struggling right now, is how do I use it? And like I said, it was a tool that was rolled out before we had the problem set, the use cases. And I think that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to figure out here. And that's one of the things that we're looking at with AI, is not just what are all the cool ways that we could use it, but really want to make it focus on the problems that we're going to solve with it.
Well, I'll give an insight there. I think what we're seeing is that, from the data in Darwin, that's interesting is that the usage, you said it, we're seeing people in their daily life already use AI like ChatGPT or Copilot, Gemini, whatever it may be. And then they're bringing it into the workforce. I mean, over 40% are already using it in their daily life.
Mhm.
And so what agencies then are taking the next leap, which maybe is jumping a step, is to say, okay, if they're already using it, I'm going to buy Copilot for everybody. But they're not matching necessarily the technology to the use case or the problem.
Mhm.
But the opportunity that's interesting is you already have a workforce that's engaged with tools, and they're choosing organically what problems they want to solve
Absolutely.
with it.
Yeah.
And so, kind of maybe part of this is just looking at what's already happening and then fitting that, embracing it into the organization
Mhm.
from the shadows, if you will, and say, okay, we're seeing that you're already using, I don't know, Gemini for your communications and PR. Let's bring that tool in and make it official, and now empower the employees to use. So do you think it's going to be more of that organic approach, or you think it is going to be more of a kind of top down, where there's a strategy building out the use
I
cases and
think it's
then
both. I think it's both. Is that, yes, organically people are using it, and you're not going to stop it. But if the organization wants to really gain change, right, it's not going to be one person at a time. It's going to have to be a cultural strategic decision that this is the direction that we want to go. So I think it's twofold, and I think AI can offer both. Is yes, on an individual basis, there's plenty of things that AI can do, but as an organizational level, how do we want to implement something, and then how do we roll it out and change it in the culture, and how do we train it?
Let's now shift gears to, I guess, governance, risk, all cyber, all those big questions, which on one side of the token, of the coin, you have opportunity, the other one, you have risk. And in government, this means a whole different thing in the public sector
Yeah.
than in the private sector. So, how do you think about the responsibility that COTA has in terms of what are the parameters I have to think about before I use a tool? Or is it first exploration and then figure out what the parameters are, what the cyber threats are? I'm curious how your perspective on the kind of risk reward, if you will, that you have here with this new technology.
Yeah, I will say being in the public sector, that is probably one of the most parts I'm challenged with is the policy around it. Is because we are public sector, of course, we have to be transparent in those types of things. And so what are the policies that we have to have in place? And then there's the other aspects of how people are using AI and what's considered public, right? So, is note taking, if I use AI, is that considered public, right? Technically, it's not, but maybe it is now. Meetings that you might be taking notes on that, now maybe those are public. So I think that whole aspect about policy is really challenging. And I won't say that we have the answers with that, but those are the things that we're having to tackle. And I think that's kind of what's maybe even it is holding back government a little bit because we have to be considerate of those aspects. And I think we're the first in terms of forging the way with that. But I think even more so why we have to go into AI to kind of force these new topics of conversation. Not doing anything to me is not an option. Is we're going to make some mistakes and we're going to have to figure out how we work forward from that. But it is a challenge that I've been thinking about a lot of how do we make sure that we have policies but still stay true to who we are as a public agency.
When you look at, if you remember, and still is happening, the wave of ransomware that hit several DOTs, public entities, and they were really on the defense, right? Because they weren't prepared for a lot of this. And now, I think there was a survey recently. It's kind of one of the top topics of top of mind for CIOs. Number two is AI. You could argue they're like one and two together because they're thinking a lot about AI from a cybersecurity perspective. So I'm gonna try and kind of pin you down here on a scale. If you were to say investment on security, cyber governance, and innovation, adoption of tools and technology. And this may change next year, but this year, where would you put the scale in terms of percentages of where you're putting most of your investment or most of your focus, if you will?
Um, that's a great question. I think we have to start with a strong foundation. So I would probably tip majority on the side of security and governance. Because I think the last thing that we need or any place needs, public or private, is, we might be doing cool things, but then we've exposed ourselves. So I think having a strong foundation is probably more important in my mind of making sure that we have that governance, we have that policy, we know how it's being used, we know how our vendors, and we might have contracts and policies about how our vendors might be using it, because that's another exposure point.
Hmm.
I think that's where we have to start, just because of who we are. I would argue maybe anybody has to start there. because if you look at just the shiny stuff, right, I think it could expose you and cause a lot of other things.
So let's talk about the shiny stuff. You mentioned
Yeah.
vendors. Maybe some of the listeners are kind of from the private sector, building new technology, or from existing companies. How many, just for kind of listeners, how many private vendors approach you in a month, would you say?
Oh my gosh, like in a day, I probably get 10, 15 emails or requests or something like that about something that they want to show me.
Okay, so let's give them a scoop here underneath the hood of kind of what is the right way. Let's talk about AI here because that's the focus. But when a lot of the vendors, I'm assuming 50% plus of them are pitching something with AI around that.
Yeah.
But what what are you looking for when a vendor is coming and approaching you and wants to interest you in what they're doing? What are the things that you're looking for in terms of how they're approaching you and what they're doing? But then also, what are the things that you don't want them to do that you see often that they're doing as well?
For me, I think I get interested when someone is showing me how they solved a problem. I recently had a vendor who was trying to get a hold of me, and then they found some connection. And they quickly talked about how they were solving problems, and they helped me network with another agency that was trying to solve a problem similar to myself. That was like, it was one of those things where I thought was incredibly useful about how they're solving problems. I think I get a lot about scare tactics and like, am I doing this and am I doing that? And putting meetings on my calendar, those types of things don't work very well.
Oh,
Uh,
just sending you a meeting
oh,
invite.
they send me a meeting invite that said that I asked for it. Yeah, they just put a meeting on my calendar, and I'm like, what is this meeting? Yeah, they just put a meeting on my calendar like I had requested it.
That's
Uh,
great.
but solving problems that are either interesting or it could be something that I might be trying to solve myself. Those examples really are priceless. Those use cases are priceless, and I think that's a huge benefit.
I'll say, and I guess I'm from the other side, so I wouldn't have the inside perspective, but it's just taking the extra mile on the research on the agency itself. So one of the
Yeah,
benefits of of government is that most of the data is available. So you can just research it and look at the projects they've
absolutely.
done, the challenges. They're all out there, even all the way down to the budget and some of the board meetings, right? And the notes that are there. So some of that preliminary work can save a lot of times versus just kind of this cold approach of putting an invite on your calendar they're not
Yeah.
available to. Well, I want to kind of finish on this, taking a step back and looking, I don't know, 30,000 feet. We talked a bit about the here and now. Uh, I want to look out, let's say even 10 years from now. Okay.
Mhm.
We're talking, at least in my mind, a transformational technology. In the same way, if I took you back to, the early 2000s in the dot-com bubble, maybe you would have foreseen this, but you'd have a hard time foreseeing we're in a complete digital era where smartphones are connected to the internet. Everything is e-commerce, and so I guess a question of that, you see this transformation as big as that, and then B, what does that look like for COTA? Not like a year from now or even 5 years, 10, 20 years from now. What does the agency look like from your perspective, and how does AI play into that?
I get really excited when I hear questions like that, just because we're at such a transformative time for CODA, right? The public has trusted us with the levy because they have trusted us to make change. And so when I think we all can be excited when you know that someone has trusted you to make change in your organization for the next 20, 30 years. So that in itself is really exciting. That's where it makes CODA to be an exciting place to be. And for me personally, being in the technology space is being able to drive that change. Uh, I'm really excited about. And for me, it's kind of my theme that I've been talking about in this podcast is I want to be able to show that we can provide the best service in Central Ohio for public transit, right? I want us to be able to be an organization that others look at and say that, they are doing public transit right. And I know that that technology is going to be probably one of the deciding factors of it, right? Every place has public transportation. Every place has different things. What will make us stand out is technology. And I'm talking about all types of technology, and I'm talking about AI too, is how are we using the information we have to provide the best service that we can provide? And that might be with data. That might be, collecting different pieces of information. That might be how the technology talks to each other and and then determining where we go next. That might be from a planning point of view about where people are living and where we're moving and where the service needs to be provided. It could be it could be with maintenance and like how can we better maintain our vehicles and what's the data telling us with that. So to me, that technology, that data, AI is all going to be a factor in terms of us being outstanding and us sticking out, is if we can use the technology to our advantage. And that's what I get excited for, is that, I want to be able to say 10 years from now that, we're one of the best public transit agencies, and that people love us. Central Ohio's, continues to boom because we've really, been a huge factor in that mobility and economic success of the region. So those things are like, that's big ideas, but I do think that we're a big factor of that.
Well, now we have a recording of this on the podcast, so we can revisit this 10
Oh
years
no,
from now to come and see, where COTA is
yeah.
going. But I'm optimistic because I know the pace of change that's happened there last 5-10 years under your leadership there. So first of all, thank you so much for joining, Sophia. And I know this has benefited a lot of people with some of the insights. So thanks again for joining the Gov AI podcast.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
That's it for this episode of the Gov AI podcast. AI is reshaping governance in real time. And as we've seen, the path forward is filled with both promise and complexity. But conversations like this, open, challenging, forward-thinking, are how we shape a smarter, more responsible future. The Gov AI podcast is produced by Poldu. Our editor is Noam Maital, with production assistance from Shani Roth and Shakel Dror. We'll be back in 2 weeks to tackle more challenges and explore creative solutions at the intersection of AI and the public sector. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and never forget that even the sharpest tools mean nothing without the hand that wields them.